Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you were managing to start your week off well. And if you didn't tune in to the service on Sunday, but you're tuning into this, I hope that it gives you a window into what we reflected on and tried to navigate. There were some difficult text, what we might call apocalyptic text, and that's difficult for us in 2025, working with that notion of revelation that is presented in the Bible. I also hope that if you were there, that maybe this will add to your experience of that service on Sunday. So I preached from the Gospel of Luke, but we also read from the book of Ezekiel. And both mention the destruction that has been brought upon peoples by, according to the text, God. And this is certainly how Ezekiel presents it. We are very familiar with the characterization of a deity that chooses particularly violent means to exercise judgment and discipline. The Bible has those instances. We, I believe it's safe to say, here at First St. Andrews, reject those understandings of God. We do recognize them as culturally determined and even over-determined. It makes sense that they would understand God in that way based on when these texts were shared and ultimately written down. But we don't see the world that way. And so if we are going to make sense of them, if we are going to understand them, then we're going to have to opt for a different explanation or a different key. So, in my consultation of some of the literature on Luke, specifically the coming of the new age that Luke announces throughout the gospel, one of the things that Luke makes clear, and I of course mentioned this on Sunday, is that no one knows the hour, that it is impossible to predict and to determine. And so our efforts to read the signs, our efforts to gain a better understanding so we can prepare and do that last minute shopping or packing or whatever. I spoke about that because according to the text, you can't know. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. Doesn't matter how good a reader of signs you are. And it doesn't matter how good you've been on a given day, right? In some ways, it removes that sense of control that we're always looking for. And I think that's probably the most disturbing thing about some of these apocalyptic texts. Another part that I wanted to kind of highlight in our little postscript today is the fact that signs are in our lives. They guide us, they direct us, we depend on them to move about the world. So there is a purpose to signs, and it's not deleterious, it's not negative, it doesn't debase us. However, there is a sense in which our overdependence on signs and our use of signs to stratify the world is called into question in these texts. Maybe not directly, but I hope that the argument that I made on Sunday and that I'm going to lift up here illustrates what I mean. Knowing how to read the signs and being guided by the signs can give you an advantage in the world. Some people are welcomed, some people are excluded. If you have the right clothes, if you speak the right way, if you have the right credentials, these are all signs. They may not be seen as a stop sign is, but they're looked at on resumes, they're heard. So there's different kinds of signs. And of course, I titled my sermon, Sign, Sign, Everywhere a Sign. So we live in a world of signs. And semiotics professors and scholars would tell you all of our communication is filtered through these signs. In the biblical text, especially with Apocalypse, which is just another word for revelation, there is something that breaks into the world of signs and tells us no amount of accurate reading is going to give us the right answer to revelation, to the coming of God or the arrival of judgment or the emancipatory moment. Whatever you describe that day as, and that Jesus is talking about, nothing you can do is going to give you a leg up. Whereas in the world that we live in, it's all about trying to get that leg up. As we know, Jesus is always sort of pushing against that tendency. The commentator that I was dependent on for my research, Frederick Danker, who was a Lutheran theologian, writes that Jesus does not conform to a pre-existent apocalyptic blueprint, maybe like the one that we read in Ezekiel. What we are invited to consider is that Jesus becomes the blueprint for apocalypse, or simply, Jesus is the apocalypse. We're not fond of saying that. It sounds frightening and disconcerting. What does that mean? Jesus is the ultimate revelation of how we are to be in the world. Jesus is the ultimate revelation and says the kingdom of God, and you know I'm often fond of saying kingdom, but in that time and place, the kingdom of God, Jesus says, is already here. It is among you. It is within you. You are witnessing it if you have but the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the heart to receive. So perhaps apocalypse, despite our fear when we hear that word, maybe it's simply inviting us to see what is here right now to be seen and to be responded to. I hope that by doing that, we will think less about planning for the last days. We might think less about trying to manage and control and protect ourselves, and more about doing what needs to be done here and now in response to the incoming kingdom that is already here. Now, there may be other ways to read this and to experience this, but this is what I presented on Sunday, and I do hope it gives you something to wrestle with, to receive, to sit with this week as you move forward considering what next must we do here as people of faith at First St. Andrews. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to seeing you next week.